Hello, welcome to the ECDPM event on localizing the water, energy, food ecosystem nexus, what we call in our jargon WEFE, the WEFE nexus in cities and translating European policy into urban investment. As you know, climate change is having a really big effect on the cities in particular, and in the Middle East and North Africa, this is really having drastic impact, including also on marginalized urban areas, which have in fact to cover a lot of the pressure due to climate change, and this has a lot of socioeconomic impact. This is particularly the case for women. That are also quite often the providers of water, energy, and waste systems, and that are often very often excluded from the decision making that is related to these issues and encounter many barriers. So it is important for women to also be included in the approaches that we are exercising for this to addressing this nexus. And it is quite important to address these tensions that might exist between the water, energy, and food and ecosystems because when we don't address them, this is creating a lot of also intercommunal tensions and political tensions. So in fact, there are rippling effects of this nexus. And as you know, we are all looking at normally in quite segmented manner to these different questions. So you have the water experts, the energy experts, the food experts, the investment experts, and so on. And trying to connect all these dimensions is often quite challenging. And when we do that, there's often also the tendency to look at that in the general level, at the country level, and not enough of what is the direct impact on communities and cities. So the purpose of our discussion today is to try to address these questions and to see how the European Union can also help in supporting this nexus and addressing in a more thought-through way the adaptation to climate change, which is unfortunately quite often also neglected. So we have a range of key experts who can address these questions, and we have a discussion which is going to be moderated today by my dear colleague Hanne Knappen. Hanne, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Sam, for this words of introduction. Good morning, everyone, for joining us for this webinar on the water, energy, food ecosystems nexus. We will indeed try to unpack this complex nexus and discuss entry points for the EU towards better integrated systems and ultimately to support climate resilience and adaptation. Now, let me start by introducing to you all our 5 guest speakers. We have first Belinda Petrie, who is co-founder and CEO of One World Sustainable Investments based in South Africa. Second, we have Eva Baños de Guisasola, who is Senior Advisor, Global Agendas, Sustainable Development Goals and Climate at Platforma, which is a strategic network hosted by CEMR, which is the Council of European Municipalities and Regions. We have Hicham Bouziane, who is Director of Planning and Regional Development at the Council of the Tanger, Tetouan, Al Hoceima region in Morocco. Fourth, we have Julia Machi, Senior Urban Specialist and Lead for Europe and the Southern Mediterranean regions at UNOP Cities Alliance. And last but not least, Vittorio Capicci, who is Program Officer on Migration and Forced Displacement at the DG for International Partnerships at the European Commission. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Let me start by you, Belinda. We have spoken a lot before this webinar already about the work that you are doing on the WEFE Nexus, about the work that One World is doing in supporting the African Development Bank on developing a WEFE Nexus framework for Africa in a few and you are doing pilot studies in a few countries, including in Egypt. But of course, as you also state on the website, the WEFE Nexus model involves synergies and trade-offs. Now, let's start with the trade-offs. What are the immediate, or with the synergies rather, what are the immediate benefits and opportunities of adopting a WEFE Nexus approach in cities in Africa?
Hannah, thank you, and greetings, colleagues. Very excited to be here. I also, in thinking about this webinar today, was thinking about the application of the thinking in cities. Because when I was thinking about your question around immediate opportunities and benefits, cities come to mind, whether this forum is about cities or not. And the reason they came to mind is that, and so I'll start with answering your question from an Africa sort of wide perspective, is that if you think about the impacts of climate change, one of the biggest impacts for African countries, many of them, is heat stress. And it's, you know, an issue that's getting growing focus in terms of how do you, I mean, there's even expertise out there now called heat stress experts in terms of looking at climate change responses. And the cities are the worst off in a heat stress situation, because you've got heat stress and the heat island effect that comes in a very built up environment that's densely populated. So one of the immediate opportunities for me is to thinking about the fact that for Africa, where we are still urbanizing at a rapid rate, and population growth, which has already happened in places like Asia, is happening, that densification in cities is growing. So from a broad perspective and a climate perspective, I think this is the perfect sort of conversation and opportunity. And of course, the climate change impacts like heat stress don't confine themselves to agriculture or to water or to energy. It all comes together, and what better place than in a city. So that's just a sort of broad brush. I think immediate opportunities and looking at, you know, trade-offs and synergies. One that immediately always comes to mind for me is that investments always come with transaction costs. And those transaction costs are very high. And they're usually very high both for the investor, let's say it's the European Union or Commission, or a European Investment Bank or an African Development Bank, the transaction costs are high. But for the investee, in other words, the beneficiary, they're also transaction costs, because they have to make the investments happen, dedicate resources, sometimes co-finance, etc. And so when you're looking at nexus investments, you're immediately broadening your transaction cost base across a range of sectors towards a common set of benefits. So you can actually optimize your transaction costs for your investments in that way and reduce them. And I think this is, you know, one of the other immediate opportunities is, you know, as Sanbila was saying at the introduction, that different experts look at the nexus in different ways. A water expert might talk about water-centric WEFE investments. I don't know what that is, but that's what happens. And I think it also helps us to think through what the role of water in the nexus is. You know, and for me, it's the common denominator. You can't have the different nexus sectors without it. You can't have a nexus without it. It's the interlocutor, in other words, the basis for dialogue. It's the economic and environmental enabler of nexus investments and nexus projects. And so it's a critical enabler. And so I think the thing around joined up investments and also that transaction cost base that gets spread is important. And so in nexus investments can both optimize and reduce those. I think there's some other really important benefits. One is thinking about impacts of investments. And I think what happens if you think about a water crisis, for example, you know, if it's say Cairo or Johannesburg, a water crisis will often be talked about in terms of the immediate water-related impacts of that crisis. So, you know, maybe people can't turn on their taps, there's not enough water in the dam, but nobody's actually and then, you know, they'll say the dam is at 10% levels, or 80% of people can't turn on their taps and get water, but nobody's actually quantifying, other than the media who make some wild stabs at this, quantifying the related impacts on food security and nutrition security and what's happening in, say, a city context when there is a water crisis for food, for energy, for the ecosystem that supports that particular community or base. So, you know, I think what it does is an immediate important benefit is that it's taking us out of that compartmentalization of, which obviously, the WEFE is trying to break silos, but it also starts to make us think coherently about impacts, benefits, positive or negative, and to tell a more integrated story that takes the water crisis outside of being a water crisis into being something that's much more meaningful for many, many more people. And I think that's really important. I think it also starts to bring in issues that often get hidden, like sanitation aspect. Where does sanitation sit in a nexus situation? And so what that can mean is that the way that we direct investment, whether it's an EU funding a project in Africa, or a combined EU-African Development Bank, or a city-level investment where there's maybe a combined outside investment and local domestic budget, is where's that money going and how do we account for the benefits of that? There's a lot more I could say. I think the last benefit is data and data sharing. So I am going sort of broad brush here in terms of the high level benefits, but cross-sectoral data sharing, which also, if you've got a data sharing initiative, can also incentivize data collection across those composite sort of indicators, is another immediate benefit. And I'm sure you want me to stop there.
Yes, thank you. I hope there is more time later to continue this very interesting points that you're raising. But I hear all in all that the nexus allows to overcome or to optimize transaction costs across sectors, is about overcoming fragmentation, creating more coherence. And I think we will hear in a minute how that this concretely can play out on the ground from our other speakers. Now I'm moving on to Eva. Going back to the importance of cities, why are they so important to take action when it comes to, dealing with climate impacts that have then an impact on various sectors such as water, food security, ecosystems, and so on. So very briefly, if you can explain us the need to focus specifically on cities. Thanks, Eva.
Okay, thanks a lot, Hanne, and thanks a lot for inviting CMR and Platforma. Just for you to know that CMR is also the European section of United Cities for Local Governments. So that's what it gives us the double mandate to also work beyond the European Union. And this is my mandate to work on sustainable development objectives and also on climate. And Hanne, you were asking me why cities are key in tackling this complex issue, and it's because they play a crucial role because they are major contributors to pollution, but they also have the solutions. They are on the ground and they know really how to deal with these issues very quickly. We only know that, we know that about 2-3% of the Earth surface is occupied by cities, but they occupy half of the population. So that's a huge figure. And it's foreseen that by 2050 will be 70% of the world population living in cities. So that's why they have a key role to play. And they also consume around, nowadays, 70% of the world's energy. We know that also the cities in Europe, specifically because at least 70% are living in European cities, are hubs of concentrated population. So that's why the need for quick action is extremely useful. And also, as being part also of the USLG network, it means that we are also collaborating with the United Nations, because we cannot tackle the climate issue only at European level. We have to go beyond the European Union level. So that's why we also work within a constituency, a UN constituency, which is called Local Governments for Municipal Authorities, LGMA. And this constituency allows to put all the cities worldwide together. So this is a very good way to work in partnership. And we've seen in the different calls that we've been participating, then the lobby that we do is really bearing fruit. And we have seen now in the last COP in Azerbaijan that cities were really speaking with one voice. Next COP will be hopefully the COP for the city. So we also have a key role to play there. So that's why we're now preparing the ground for this, because we cannot deal with this alone. And we have also seen that dealing with climate has enormous impact, on our lives, on our daily lives, and not only affecting the energy sector, but also the noise, the water, etc. So that's what I think that cities are important, because they have also a huge resource demand on the spot. They're also an opportunity for innovation, and they can also work in interconnected systems. And there are some good cases, and I wanted to, if I may, Hanne, to mention 2 examples from memberships. And one is Fonds Mallorquí, which is based in Spain, and they have implemented a project in Bolivia, and is looking into a diagnosis and an action plan for sustainable access and efficient to energy sanitation. That's like a decentralized cooperation action, which has worked very well, and that also is helping to reduce the CO2 emissions. And there is also another example in Cape Town, which is also in South Africa, as a member of the Commonwealth Local Government Forum, which is one of our members. And they have also dealt with water crisis and water management because of the climatic conditions. And they have also been suffering droughts for a long time. And they have installed in the city different systems like water conservation and recycling system, a renewable energy system with very concrete solutions, and also affecting the urban agriculture, because the WEFE Nexus is also looking into the food security aspect. So that's why by tackling the water scarcity problem, they have really managed to have this integrated system that is working well. And the water scarcity is still there, but they're using the resources in a more efficient way. So we hope that also by bringing our voice together worldwide, not only the European voice level, but also worldwide, will also help the member states decrease their emissions, because member states, as you know, they have to present the plans on climate this year, the national determined contributions, and we're claiming for having the involvement of the city level, because member states cannot tackle climate change on their own. And if I may say it as well, we at CMO, we also organize trainings, training academies for politicians, and we're organizing one in March dealing exactly with this topic of the conference about water and climate aspects. So I'll be happy to also invite you to speak there of the relevance of this nexus. Thank you very much, Anna.
Great. Thank you, Eva, also for sharing some concrete examples. Now we're moving on to Hisham. We are very happy to have you, Hisham, here on our panel, because you can share more about the work that you're doing on the WEFE Nexus in Moroccan cities. We know that, as we have already heard, the WEFE Nexus is quite complex, but you need to address water, energy, food ecosystems as interconnected systems. So from your experience in the cities in Morocco that you work in, which strategies have worked? Can you give us an example? Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to participate with the webinar. Thank you very much to the think tank ECDPM for the invitation. The nexus is complex. I will present to you in a succinct wide experience of the Tangier, Tétouan, Al-Hoceima region of Morocco. Today, we gather to discuss a critically important topic, the water, energy, food ecosystem, nexus or WEFE. The concept plays a central role at international, national, and regional levels, particularly for our region of Tangier, Tétouan, Al-Hoceima, which has actively engaged in developing its regional development plan for the 2022-2027 period by testing several innovative approaches, including the WEFE nexus. In a global context where resources are becoming increasingly limited, an integrated resource management approach is not only desirable, but necessary. The WEFE nexus teaches us that our water, energy, food, and ecosystem are closely interconnected. Fragmented or sector-specific approaches can no longer suffice. Our region has undertaken several initiatives to promote this approach by organizing the first international edition of the Nexus in Morocco, in Tangier, where highlighted the limitation of independent sectoral interventions and gathered valuable recommendations. For instance, the need to hold this event regularly every 2 years to sustain dialogue and collective action on this vital subject. Furthermore, a second example, feasibility study has demonstrated feasibility of an innovative irrigation project over an area of more than 15,000 hectares, complete with water transfer between two dams over a distance of 39 or 40 kilometers, is supported by renewable energy, a floating photovoltaic system. This project reflects our commitment to integrating clean energy into our solutions for sustainable impact. The concerned agricultural areas have now been developed and equipped, and the transfer canal is in the final phase. These efforts demonstrated the central role of the state and political will in water management. Today, our focus is on energy and completing projects implemented by the state, embedding them in sustainable development and WEFE nexus. In conclusion, we must continue working together to integrate these interconnected sectors for both our region and as model for others to follow together. We can build a more sustainable and resilient future. Thank you for attention.
Okay, thanks a lot, Hisham. Thank you also for speaking in English. I know that you're more comfortable in French, but thank you. It was very clear. Yeah, glad to hear about this this dialogue that you're organizing that you organized in Tangier 2 years ago. I believe that the next one will be early February again. So it's very good to hear about these initiatives specifically on the Nexus in Morocco. Now, moving on to Julien, working for Cities Alliance. We have also spoken a lot about the work that you're doing specifically on inclusive and gender-sensitive adaptation action in cities in North Africa, in the Middle East. So you do a lot of on-the-ground implementation of projects close to people. Can you give us a concrete example of a project that you are doing, so related to inclusive climate resilience action? Thanks.
Thank you, Anne, and good morning to everyone. So I think, as San at the beginning said, I think one critical dimension of this is how climate change affects women, and women often bear a burden of care which is increasing during climate shocks or climate event. So in our approach, we always try to focus on climate adaptation that also includes and empowers women. And you asked me for an example. I can share with you a small project, but I think it's quite impactful that we are conducting right now in Kairouan, in Tunisia. We just conducted a mapping exercise to understand the relationship between, in fact, women, gender equality, and water in the city, and how water scarcity impacts them. So we ran a survey, questionnaires to really understand this relationship, and we also look at how also water scarcity increase also domestic work and care responsibilities. And through this participatory process, women identified, in fact, a traditional but also forgotten system of water collection, which is called measure. And it was a system to collect rainwater and to filter it, and then the water could be used, in fact, over the year. And this measure existed in every home, but then was not used or was not maintained after, of course, the connection with the public water system. But the measure, I think, could still provide, in fact, an effective climate adaptation solution. And we started then to map the existing measure in the different houses, the ones that are working, the ones that are not working. We are training women also on how to use them. And we also support them in applying for public grant to restore private measure in their home. But we are also working with the municipalities, so with the local authorities, to create collective measure. So the measure normally are private, but can also be created collective ones that can also provide water to public gardens. So we can also somehow, it's kind of WEFE, mini wide WEFE project, because connects ecosystem and water. And this will help also reduce the reliance on the water, public water supply. I think it's also important to mention that the data that we collected and also the testimonies of women that we gathered are also being used to inform local adaptation plans and also raise awareness with other cities in Tunisia. And now also other cities, like for example, Tunis, where we are also working with other projects, are starting initiatives to explore also these ancient methods of water management. So I believe that the key to address these challenges lies also in data collection, so diagnostic work, rediscovering also local knowledge, and working with municipality. Municipality needs to be in the lead of the projects. We are there to support. And they are key actors, in fact, to then implementing sustainable solutions.
Okay, yeah, that was a very good overview. So I hear it's about data collection, but it's also about bringing in or going back to traditional methods, in this case for water harvesting and water use, and working closely with local authorities. So now moving on to Vittorio. Vittorio works on migration and forced displacement, and it may seem on first sight that the work you're doing is disconnected from the discussion we are having today, but it is absolutely not. On the contrary. So we have invited you specifically because you have experience working with integrated approaches to migration issues, in this case, in sub-Saharan Africa. And also how working on facilitating cross-sectoral collaboration. So it's definitely in our interest to understand how this works now at the EU side, how you're dealing with integrated, interconnected systems, how we can learn from this experience also for the WEFE nexus issues. So thanks, Vittorio.
Thanks a lot, Anne, and all the fellow panelists for this very timely and interesting discussion, and good morning to all the listeners. Yeah, indeed, even if the discussion mainly focused on the MENA region, I think that there is important experiences that we can share as INPA working in Sub-Saharan Africa. I specifically work in the regional unit for Sub-Saharan Africa in DG INPA. And we think that the EU, as with other donors, certainly has a key role to play to facilitate the cross-sectoral collaboration that you mentioned. And I think that we still have a lot of work to do to be able to work alongside other partners to support these kind of efforts. I just want to be, very, very short and brief, and also provide a little insight in what we are currently doing. I think our basically biggest investment at the moment, and what we are really trying to pilot, is to apply area-based and localized approaches in regional programs. I hope to be able to talk to you about an urban program that we have launched together with Cities Alliance later on in the discussion. But for the moment, I think it would be even more interesting to just share a little insight into another program that we have designed and will be basically sees implementation in 2025. It's called Regional Responses to Climate Displacement. It's an ambitious 100 million euros program that will be implemented by the IOM. And I think that really the approach sums up a lot of the things that we've said during the discussion today. This program will be implemented in two regions in Sub-Saharan Africa that are really suffering from the effects of climate change. One is the Lake Tanganyika region with all the problems related to floods, and the other one is the Southern Africa cyclonic belt, which really suffers from the cyclones. And in any case, the two regions also suffer from other climate adverse effects like soil erosion or droughts and so on. And with this program, we basically decided to take on a threefold strategy. So we focus on indeed policy frameworks, which means disaster risk reduction and gender responsive adaptation as the first, really tool to basically work alongside partners. That means national adaptation plans, but also regional coordination mechanisms. And we think that this is very key. The second one is to really embed a WEFE approach into our program. We really focus on ecosystems, on infrastructure, on water and energy, on sanitation. And then the third one is really people. And here I come with my migration background. We focus basically on hotspot areas where you have peri-urban, urban, but also rural areas, and clearly identified. Many of the areas that we have basically selected through the work of our delegations and partners are areas where you typically have one city or rapidly urbanizing area and around it, rural areas. And, we really look systematically at how we can tackle the climate vulnerabilities by putting people and local authorities at the forefront. This is an initiative that we have been very happy to be working on for the past year. It was presented at COP29. We think it's a model because it really focuses on localization, on systems, on people. And we're really happy to basically discuss it with you today and in the future. And also, we think it will launch a very interesting discussion internally for the EU to be thinking about new and insightful initiatives that can contribute to the issues and challenges of our time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can you give us the name of this initiative for people who are interested?
Yeah. Yes, it's called Responses to Climate Displacement. It's the Red to Clean program.
Okay, thank you. So just for your information, after this workshop, we will write a short report, and we will also add the links to all the interesting projects and programs that are being mentioned by our guests. Now, for everyone following this discussion on YouTube, there is, if I understood correctly, a chat function. So while you're listening, you can put your questions there. We will have a short moment for Q&A. But before the Q&A, I would like to now move on to a second short round of questions, starting again with Belinda. The question to you is, it's about innovative policy tools or incentives that international partners, such as the EU, you also mentioned the EIB before. So which tools, policy tools and incentives can these partners provide to encourage cities to adopt integrated approaches to climate resilience? Thanks. We cannot hear you. You're still muted. Let's see if Belinda can unmute herself, or it's something that we can do on our side. Not sure. Okay, yes.
Okay, I think we're good. Sorry, Hannah. Very good question, because one of the biggest, or the biggest challenge, which we're talking about with the nexus, is its implementation, effective, requires a sort of transformational change of almost seismic proportions, right? I mean, we're moving from a silo-based mentality through to a level of integration that's critical. And so I thought about this policy and tools question in that regard. You get rid of that. And I think, 3 or 4 key things. And this is something we're doing for the African Development Bank at the moment, is developing a clear investment framework that encompasses clear criteria, indicators for measuring performance across the nexus, perhaps even scenario modeling, data sharing initiatives, and financial models that sort of typology of financial models that could be aligned with different investment projects across the nexus, and also different enabling environments, because the pace of change will vary in terms of that transformational change point that I was making earlier. The pace of change will vary from one city to the next, one region to the next, one country to the next. So those, I think this is something the EU and the different development finance institutions in the European Union can support. With that, maybe it sounds like a little bit of a criticism here, but I think that for African countries in particular, and maybe our Moroccan colleague can comment on this as well, is we need flexible regulatory frameworks and a flexible approach to what is required. So although in the investment framework, I'm talking about clear criteria, etc., and indicators, there also needs to be a level of flexibility to address, where different countries in Africa are and where different cities are. and be realistic about this. Otherwise, we're not going to get the nexus off the ground. So reality check around the regulatory requirements, I think is critical. That's not terribly innovative, but it's important. I also think we need case studies that demonstrate success. And I think it would be really, really cool and useful if a player, development finance institution would be a particularly good example that could do this, is to develop case studies iteratively over time. Because you're not just going to have a WEFE nexus project off the bat. You need an enabling environment, you need institutional arrangements, you need data sharing, all the issues we've talked about today. And so these things will gradually grow and improve over time, and I think you want to be able to track the trade-offs and synergies over time as you strengthen different aspects. So I think some iterative sort of case studies that show emerging best practice and some tangible results around how you measure trade-offs are important. And obviously with that, you need clear indicators that are measurable. I think my last point is around performance-based investments, which, the investment community try and do. So investments that are use different type of mechanisms. It could be grants, it could be debt finance, it could be combined. But the performance base would need to track indicators that are composite across the nexus and demonstrate those benefits. That also relates back to the opportunities and benefits that I was talking about earlier. And I think my very last point, and it's a thought that actually came to mind as various speakers were talking earlier, is I'm just wondering around the role of a sort of rewards kind of program to stimulate nexus investments and actually give an incentive. So an initial incentive that can grow, an initial investment that can grow as the city or country or whatever it is performs better. And so there's a reward in increased investments that's very tangible trajectory from the outset. I'll stop there, Hannah. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, very good points. I hear performance-based investments. I really like this idea of a reward system for good practices to incentivize investors, among others. You mentioned that we need case studies that show how to successfully, how this WEFE nexus can play out on the ground in an effective way. And this is a good bridge to the second question for Eva, because we are really looking for success stories or case studies of cities in Europe, for example, where implementing a WEFE nexus has worked, even though there may be challenges, and what can be the lessons for cities in North Africa, in the Middle East, for example. You mentioned a few already when I asked you the previous question, but if you can elaborate a bit on very practically what can work. Yes, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Anne. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, the cities play a crucial role in combating climate change, and I also want to mention the example of the Covenant of Mayors. And as you may know, this is a crucial initiative for cities. It started in Europe with the Covenant of Mayors Europe, and it was so successful that now it has gone worldwide. And there was we coordinated the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa as CMR, and it proved to be really a successful story, a successful project, but also in terms of learning. We have also seen in the Sustainable Development Goals agenda that we are still lagging behind the implementation. We have the 2030 year as a milestone, and only 70% of these SDGs are really good on track. So there's something we're not doing right. So we have to maximize the efforts that the cities are engaged on, and the Global Covenant of Mayors is one of the examples. But also, we, as I mentioned, we're also involved in the UN negotiations, and we're also involved in the negotiations with UN on the Sustainable Development Goals implementation. And we publish an annual report every year on the implementation at the association level. And we managed to collect 200 examples. So this is something that I can also share with you, Hani, for the participants. And I tried to select a couple of examples from these big annex that we collected. And one of them is from NALAS, is the National Association of Local Authorities for Southeast Europe. And that was a project on Women's Mayor Network. We are also giving a huge priority to the gender aspects in our association, but also worldwide, because nothing can really be successful if the vulnerable groups, especially women, are not involved. And I'm happy that one of our colleagues mentioned the involvement of women. So this is a very successful project of integrating the gender aspect, cross-cutting and across all the 17 SDGs. Then also in France, Cités Unies France, which is another of our members, they have offered a tool to all the local governments in France that are taking part in this cross-sector climate mission. So this is a way for involving all the departments at the city level, not only to work on climate, but to work in all sectors, but in a more coordinated way. And this is this climate mission aspect is something that is working now for a few years. And this is also a tool for more responsible decentralized cooperation. This is also some of the core business of Platforma to work on the centralized cooperation. We have seen this in Africa, where we have a special focus also in Latin America, where the centralization of the actions really proves very positive. The government cannot really take everything on board and other responsibilities. So we encourage this decentralized cooperation, but also with a common starting point. So we know the background, we know what is starting point, and then the European cities really engage on this decentralized cooperation with other cities worldwide. And then there's another example in Barcelona Provincial Council, DIVA, and they have been working on, they call Renewable 230, and it's a transformative project that is aiming at bringing renewable energies and energy communities together in the municipalities of the province of Barcelona. And this is also helping to decarbonize the societies. This is a huge problem. And if we want to also cope with the decarbonization targets at the European level, we need to start at the city level and also replicate those good examples outside the European Union. And then another example is also in Spain, and it's a project of the Mallorcan Funds for Solidarity and Cooperation, and they financed 7 projects in Morocco, Nicaragua in the past year, using SDG 1 as the core SDG. And this also helped improve the food security for the vulnerable rural population and also linked to the COVID consequences. And that has resulted in a really food production that has never been seen before. So this is really a good collaboration also on the centralized cooperation level that has proven very positive. And then I would have another 200 examples to share with, but I can also share the link with you. And then we do this exercise of assessing what is the implementation of the SDGs at association level. But the good thing is that in our findings on this report is that we see that there's much more awareness over the SDGs implementation is at the city level, also the citizens, because you cannot really make any progress at city level if the citizens are not involved. So that's why this is also an improvement there, but there's also a gap between the national governments and the city and the local level. We are also encouraging our members to establish more contacts and more dialogue with the national governments, but this is also a plea that we're doing at European Union level and also at international level. Cities are willing to help, and cities have not enough resources, but have some resources, but there's also a need for a more regular dialogue. So we don't want just an adult dialogue to participate in different summits. We just want a permanent, a regular dialogue where we can assess the problem on the ground, and where we can also offer solutions, and where we can work together, and then the results are obvious. And we've seen very positive, good results where the national government was with the city government. Thank you very much.
Okay, I hear that decentralized cooperation, involvement of citizens is key. We heard also earlier from Julia the work that they are doing on participatory approaches in Tunisia, so that these ways of working are key to address the WEFE nexus. And moving on now to Hisham. So very concrete question, what would be your advice to the EU? We know that the EU is very active and very present in Morocco. What would be your advice if they want to support the WEFE nexus in Moroccan cities? What should be, for example, the top 3 priorities for the EU? Thanks.
I would like to share with you the advancement of our project, the Local Energy Climate Services, SLEC. This project co-financed by the European Union at 85%. Embodies our strategic vision for sustainable development through the creation of 8 eco-efficient building, the base infrastructures will serve as pivotal hubs for sustainable development, especially concerning energy and building themes. Our objective is to make this Slack center catalyst for awareness and information for all local stakeholders. Based on an in-depth benchmark, we have decided that the Slack should not be limited to a single topic. They are well positioned to address various issues such as the WEFE nexus, emphasizing the integration of water, energy, food, and ecosystem. Furthermore, we are integrating innovative water management projects such as desalination. A desalination plant is already operational in Al Hoceima city, and a second one is under study in Tangier. Additionally, we have projects for the reuse of wastewater for irrigating green spaces in the cities of Tangier and Tetouan. The European Union could provide technical and financial support for the development of these circular development initiatives and the use of non-conventional waters. We are currently working on modernizing public lighting in a dozen municipalities, particularly those that will host the Slack. This initiative is part of a series of actions aimed at improving energy efficiency and reducing our carbon footprint. In parallel, we are exploring the conversion of industrial areas into eco-industrial parks, thus reinforcing our commitment to sustainable industry. Moreover, in Tangier, we conducted pre-feasibility studies on the methanization of organic waste from the agro-industry, revealing significant potential for the production of green energy. The projects highlight our commitment to transforming environmental challenges into opportunities for sustainable growth. We seek the support of the European Union to ensure the sustainability of the Slack project. This partnership is crucial for providing an inspiring example of the role of Slack as instruments of sustainable development. Additionally, through the MED program, we have developed a dozen WEFE nexus solutions in our region, which will serve as a working basis for these services. In conclusion, the priority today for our region and with the European Union can support circular economy and waste management, sustainable water management, and decarbonization or industry. Thank you.
Okay, we can also share the link afterwards to the Slack project that you mentioned. I hear that what is most welcome based on the work that you are doing, from your perspective, is technical assistance from the EU to work on circular economies, wastewater management, and so on. So now moving on to Julia. Very concrete question here. In your experience working with cities in the Southern Mediterranean region, what are the current challenges that cities and the communities within these cities have in adapting to climate change?
Yeah, thank you, Anne. I think when I hear also this presentation, of course, I think we have to also take into account that we are also working with secondary cities, small cities in also in the remote place. So it's fantastic what the region of Tangier is doing. But I think the reality in other places is very different in the region. And also when we talk about multi-sectoral approach, WEFE nexus, how then to translate this at the local level is really the question. Because we are working in cities where there is really limited annual budget, there are a small technical team, they have to cover everything. So they are really under a pressure. They need technical support, they need funding to then implement also solutions. One thing is to develop plans and strategy, and one thing is really then to implement solution on the ground. And especially because in the region, we look at North Africa and Middle East, there are also ongoing conflict. There is also a trend towards decentralization of power. So this is a challenge, in fact, also for municipalities when they have, in fact, to respond to the needs. There is urbanization connected also with conflicts and climate change, as also Vittorio mentioned, the link with climate and migration towards secondary cities, in fact. So this means that the cities are in fact the key, of course, but also the challenge, so the focal point of our effort, but also the concerns that we need to address. And I think based on our experience, I think we need to focus on 3 critical areas. The first one that was also mentioned by the colleague from Platforma is really the importance of regional platform. They are still very important places where local authorities, especially the ones that normally do not have a voice, they are not visible, to exchange knowledge, to advocate for their needs, to also secure funding for their projects. So this also peer-to-peer learning. So I think it's important that these platforms are always connected with concrete implementation on the ground. The second is, as has been said, the technical support. I think cities need technical expertise to design, but especially to implement effective climate adaptation strategies. I look also at procurement process to improve also the public procurement process, to include also an inclusivity approach, a sustainable approach into that. And also support in developing, in fact, multi-sectorial project is really time consuming to connect, to understand and to connect water, energy, food ecosystem nexus, to understand it and then to implement. So it's really about governance, putting also different sectors together, facilitate this dialogue even within a municipality. Sometimes is really difficult. And the other one, it is really targeted funding. There is a urgent need for direct funding to municipality and local governments for climate adaptation, and ideally grants that possibly are also designed for the purpose, so linked to climate adaptation. And I think this funding should also be accessible and tailored to the unique challenge faced by secondary cities. And yes, and then all these 3 elements should be linked, in fact, if possible. So the technical assistance, the funding, the grant funding, and this regional approach, regional space.
Okay, yeah. Julia, it's good that you make the point that there are indeed many differences between cities, because we just started talking about cities as such, but it's true that there are secondary, more remote cities with less means. You have wealthy cities, capitals. So dealing with integrated approaches depends also on the city you're working in. And you're rightly making the point that it's often about governance and understanding the politics behind who is dealing with the water, energy, food, ecosystems, and so on, where do the priorities lay, the power relations, and so on. So this is a really important, but also very complex issue when implementing nexus approaches. Now, I have a last question for Vittorio. It's about the EU funding instruments. We have, for example, everyone knows the Global Gateway Initiative. What role do these type of instruments play in advancing integrated and inclusive urban adaptation investments, and how can they be optimized? Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Hanne. And I think this is a very important question, and it's a very complex one to tackle. And I still think that, as Julia says, really, and as you just said, a city is not a monolith, and we have different kinds of cities in different regions. And I think Julia said rightly that although you have some good examples, there is still really a long way to go. For me, a key starting point is really localization. We really need, for a strategy like a Global Gateway to basically really try and localize the investments that we make. And especially when talking about urban adaptation strategies, this is somehow it becomes almost obvious, and yet we are not there yet. So I think as European Commission, we really need to try and do more on that front. And I think that we need to really work on integrated approaches between regions, because at the end of the day, the issue of mobility, which is the one I work on the most, is one that really links regions together. And when you talk about climate issues in cities and risks, you talk about urban heat, sea level rise, extreme rainfall, and flooding. And cities know best the issues, and they really should be at the forefront of the solutions. And so I think that the project and program that we embarked on last year in June 2024 that we signed with Cities Alliance, I think is a really good example of how we should be basically move forward. It's a program that it's a regional program. Again, I go into the programming just to provide the listeners with a practical insight. It's a program that we are implementing in the Horn of Africa, so in a fragile context, typically. Cities Alliance has basically put in place a system that we really like, and we think that we would like to use as a model also for other programs, which is one that basically takes the approach of capacity building by doing. We talk about capacity building a lot. What does it mean, really? What happens after we build the capacity? I think that actually this program shows that we can build the capacity while the city implements directly the program. In this program, for instance, we've seen how a city like Koboko in northern Uganda managed through the pilots that we financed on the EU Trust Fund to really achieve key achievements, and to really solve major challenges within the specific urban context, which was basically linked to how to build, urban infrastructure, how to develop urban development plans for their communities, but also for the many refugees that they host. So I think cities really need that. They really need localized models. They need to be able to implement through grants, because at the end of the day, a city that is able to manage grants is a city that is able to attract private investment. Through that, we can really de-risk investments. And I think, just to conclude, cities nowadays, they don't really need aid. They really need investments. And the only way that you have to really do it well is to really try to put people at the forefront of these efforts, and have the mayors and the administrations and the civil society will engage thoroughly in the implementation. And just to conclude on this point also, I think we really need to prioritize climate security and climate adaptation issues, because those could be and already are challenges that affect not only our partners but also Europe. It's really security and stability. So we really think that those kind of approaches and these kind of programs are deeply needed. Thank you.
But so I want to thank all our experts, Belinda, Eva, Hisham, Julia, and Vittorio, for sharing your views. It was short, but it was the start of more discussions on the WEFE Nexus throughout 2025. Now, I'd like to pass the floor on to my colleague, Amandine Sabourin, who works on European foreign and development policy, for the closing remarks. So, Amandine, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Hannah, and thank you, everyone, actually, indeed, for your very interesting and discussion contributions to this very key discussion this morning. Very difficult to conclude after such a rich webinar, but maybe three points, three takeaways. First, we all agree on the necessity to focus on adaptation. And even if it still needs to be maybe showcased, and you repeated the need to conduct case studies, to provide more data, etc. For which is the first point I would note. The second point is the need for an integrated approach. It reduces the transaction costs of investments. It also create and contribute to create an enabling environment. It ensures coherence at various levels of governance, etc. And it reinforces the capacity and the accountability of cities and local governments. So working in an integrated approach, in a nexus approach, is key. And then they need to focus on at the local level. And you showed that the cities are key players to implement such an integrated approach. One point that was key as well for me is the need to connect the cities and the regions. That was just on which Vittorio just came back. So that in a very quick way, I would say those 3 points would be my takeaways for this morning.
Okay, thanks a lot, Amandine, for also being brief and to the point. Thank you also, San, for the introduction, and big thank you to all our speakers and to everyone listening. And so, as said, we will follow up with a short report with key links for further reading. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice day.